Oral questions. Question orale, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
8%, Mr. Speaker. That's how many Canadians the Prime Minister now plans to have vaccinated by April. 85% of Israelis are already vaccinated. Americans are vaccinating 2 million people per day. Why does this Prime Minister think that 8% by April is good enough for Canadians?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I have good news to share concerning vaccine deliveries in Canada. On the week of March 8th, we are expecting over 460,000 doses of Moderna. The week of March 22nd, we're expecting over 840,000 doses of Moderna, which means we would have received over 2 million doses, even more than promised in the first quarter. And in the first 2 weeks of April alone, we'll be receiving over 1.5 million doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. We will continue to work every single day to bring as many vaccines as possible to Canadians as quickly as possible.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is announcing good news. Well, what did Dr. Tam say on Friday? Her announcement was, quote, for the next few months, we're not going to have a lot of people vaccinated. That's just a fact, end quote. This means our country is extremely vulnerable to a third wave of COVID-19. Did the Prime Minister's slow approach on the vaccine rollout guarantee a third wave of COVID-19 for Canada?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as of last summer, we started negotiating for vaccine contracts. We signed more contracts with more different companies for more potential doses for Canadians than just about any other country. And we've been delivering, as scheduled, over 6 million doses by the end of the first quarter, 20 million doses into the spring, and everyone who wants a vaccine will be able to be vaccinated before the end of September. We are on track, Mr. Speaker, but we are working every single day to accelerate that even further.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister is not on track, Mr. Speaker, and here's why. 300,000. That's how many people need to be vaccinated per day with a 2-dose vaccine to meet the Prime Minister's September deadline. That's like vaccinating the city of Vaughan every single day. What is the plan to vaccinate 300,000 people every single day to meet that September deadline?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as we've said from the very beginning, we have been working with the provinces in preparation for the big lift in the coming weeks as we go from vaccines coming in slowly because of manufacturing delays and ramped-ups to receiving millions upon millions of vaccines coming in and getting into people's arms. We will be working with the private sector. We will be working with provinces and territories. We will be working with family doctors and pharmacies. We're going to make sure that everyone who wants a vaccine gets vaccinated by September.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Le Canada a vacciné moins.
Canada has vaccinated less than 4% of its population. The U.S. has vaccinated nearly 20% of its population. Canada is late. The Prime Minister has promised to vaccinate all Canadians by September. In order to do that, we would need to be vaccinating 300,000 people a day. Where is the plan, Mr. Speaker? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I am very pleased to announce today that we will be receiving 460,000 doses of Moderna the week of the 8th of March and 840,000 the week of the 22nd of March, which means that through the first quarter, we will have received more than 2 million doses. And in the first 2 weeks of April, we will receive more than 1.5 doses of the Pfizer vaccine. And we will be receiving large quantities of doses in the months to come. And we will be working closely with the provinces to get them in the arms of Canadians. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. We would need 300,000 a week, Mr. Speaker. We would need that per day, not per week. Israel has vaccinated almost everyone. The United States is vaccinating hundreds of thousands of people a day. Canada is in the 53rd position in world rankings. That's unacceptable for a G7 country, Mr. Speaker. How many Canadians will be vaccinated next week? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we will be receiving hundreds of thousands of vaccines per week. And from the very beginning, we have been working with the provinces and territories. I would like to reassure my honorable colleague that I believe in the provinces and territories. We have been working with them for months to ensure that they can deliver the vaccines as quickly as possible. I can also assure him that the provinces and territories have firmly committed that they will be able to increase the number of vaccinations in order to be able to use all the vaccines that may arrive in Canada. The honourable member for Belleuil-Chambly. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The possible white paper on possible plans that this government has put out has 2 points in its favor. It recognizes that French is in a precarious position, and it also recognizes that we must act. It states an intention. Now, in Quebec, we already have Bill 101. We need to be masters of our own future when it comes to language. Can the Prime Minister tell us what his minister's new project does that goes further or better than Bill 101? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Ultimately, there shouldn't be a conflict between the Bloc Québécois and the Liberal Party of Canada. We both recognize that French is endangered in Canada and in Quebec, and we will take action. But here in the government, we recognize that we need to take action not only to protect la belle langue in Quebec, but also elsewhere in Canada, Saint-Boniface, Moncton, and everywhere else where French is spoken in the country. That is what we can do in the federal government, and we will, as we reform the Official Languages Act. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, the Bloc Québécois is not against helping French outside Quebec. Of course not. But what the Bloc Québécois is saying is, given that perhaps this working paper may eventually turn into a piece of legislation, who knows when that will be? It could be as late as next year. Why not immediately take action and apply Bill 101 in federally regulated businesses in Quebec? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it's clear that the Bloc Québécois is concentrated on Quebec, and that's its right, of course. But here, as the federal government, as proud Quebecers and proud Canadians, we are here to protect the French language throughout Canada, and that is exactly what we're going to do. We are going to work hard to protect the French language in Quebec, working with the government of Quebec, but we will also work with the other provincial governments as well as our partners and municipalities throughout the country to ensure that the beautiful language of Molière can thrive. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South. Throughout the country, people are unable to buy the medication they need. I have met families who have to slice their pills in two because they don't have enough money. People need universal Pharmacare. All Quebec unions agree with this. Will the Prime Minister vote in favor of universal and entirely public Pharmacare? Yes or no? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, no Canadian should have to choose between paying for drugs and paying for food. In a single generation, we've done more than any other government to lower the price of medications. We are working with the provinces and territories to ensure that all Canadians have access to affordable medication. But we are not going to do what the NDP is suggesting and force Quebec and the other provinces to adopt a federally designed solution. Instead, we will work in partnership with the provinces and respect their areas of constitutional jurisdiction.
South.
Today, the Prime Minister has a choice. Will he stand on the side of people who cannot afford the medication they need and desperately need help? Or will he stand on the side of Big Pharma, who doesn't want to see medication coverage for all? The Liberal government's own report states that a Canada Pharmacare Act is one of the key steps in establishing medication coverage for all. That's exactly what our new Democratic bill does. So my question to the Prime Minister, will he be voting in favor of our bill to bring in medication coverage for all Canadians, yes or no?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, no Canadian should have to choose between paying for their medication or putting food on the table. That's why this government has done more over the past 5 years than any previous government to lower the prices of prescription drugs. And we know there is more to do, Mr. Speaker. But unlike the NDP, we will not be imposing in provincial jurisdiction rules that are not worked out with them. We respect the Constitution on this side of the House, and we'll work hand in glove with the premiers to ensure that we're ensuring Pharmacare universally across this country.
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
Le Premier ministre a des défauts partout.
Now, the Prime Minister has failed in many ways, Mr. Speaker. The highest unemployment rate and the highest deficit in the G7. Another thing, the lowest vaccination rates in the G7. Another failure. When the Montreal Habs were faced with a string of losses, they fired their coach. Given that that's the case, wouldn't it be better if the Liberals also fired their coach? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we made a direct promise to Canadians at the beginning of the pandemic. We promised that we would be there for them as long as the pandemic lasted, and that is what we're doing. We are there to support workers, families, small businesses. We will be there to support our seniors. We will continue to protect the health of Canadians so that we can get through this pandemic and reestablish economic growth as quickly as possible. That is our plan. That is our approach. But the Conservatives seem to think we're spending too much. That's just not true, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Carleton.
Trudeau killed jobs in the West, and now we learned intentionally in Quebec. This Prime Minister, by contrast, spreads job losses around equally. In fact, 850,000 of them. The highest unemployment in the G7. The worst economic growth per capita since the Great Depression. Doesn't this Prime Minister understand that spreading misery around equally is not a virtue?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative politicians from the very beginning of this pandemic kept insisting that we were spending too much in investing on Canadians, that we should have helped businesses before we helped families. The member opposite specifically said that he didn't believe in the kind of investments we were making in Canadians. Well, he was wrong then and he is wrong now. Indeed, as of January, Canada has recovered 71% of the jobs lost in the wake of the pandemic, compared with only 56% in the U.S. At 64.3%, Canada has a higher labor force participation rate than Germany, the U.S., and Japan. We are working right.
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
Well, the problem with that is on 49 different occasions in the House, the Prime Minister said the best measurement of jobs is the unemployment rate. And by that measure, Japan has a 3% unemployment rate. Germany and the UK, 5% unemployment rate. US, 6%. Italy and France, two socialist countries, have 9% unemployment rate. But Canada is at the top of the heap for job losses and for unemployment. Why does the Prime Minister excel so much at being the worst? Is it because he has so much practice?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, while the opposition plays political word games, we're going to remain focused on Canadians. We have been, from the very beginning, there to invest in Canadians, to support small businesses through this historic pandemic, working with families, working with workers to support them as we make it through this. We're going to continue to stay focused on what is necessary to support families across this country and bring our economy roaring back as we reopen. That's the plan and the focus this government has taken. Conservatives can well say we're doing too much. We know we're going to continue to do what is necessary.
L'honorable député de Chicoutimi.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, this Liberal government is becoming a champion in the art of announcing policies that have not been well thought out. The Prime Minister recently announced new quarantine measures for travelers. But what's actually happening at our borders is not pretty. People can't get into the country if they don't have a hotel room reserved. But people want to make a reservation, but they end up spending 3 days on the phone and not getting an answer. What is this Prime Minister's plan to fix the situation? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we are here to deliver on the strictest border measures, one of the strictest border measures in the world. Since March, we have brought in very strong measures, and we will continue to protect Canadian safety. I understand that the situation is complicated for some people trying to come back to Canada, and we are working hard to make it easier to reserve a hotel room and be safe. But we would like to underscore that this is not the time to travel. This is the time to stay home, stay safe, and to protect our neighbors as well. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Fiord. Mr. Speaker, we know that ideally people wouldn't be traveling. We know that, but there are Canadians who need to come back home, and in those cases, it's up to the government to implement appropriate measures to ensure that they can return safely and in an orderly fashion. Unfortunately, we're seeing the exact opposite. Each time this government has a plan, it either comes too late or it's completely bungled. I would like to know, when will the Prime Minister fix this situation? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, our quarantine plans for Canadians returning are working. Yes, there have been challenges at the very beginning of the program, but we will be fixing those problems and ensure that the travelers are safe, and so are other Canadians when they return to Canada. We understand that this is a difficult situation, but we will keep on protecting not only travelers but all Canadians with these responsible measures. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, 25 hours waiting on the phone to try to reserve a hotel room. It is quite something. And yet, with this government, we should have expected it. They didn't have a rapid tracing system. They didn't have a good vaccine plan. And now they failed to come up with a plan for quarantines. Why is this Prime Minister always so unprepared and always late? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, Canada has some of the strictest measures in the world with regard to travellers in the border. The concerning COVID variants have forced us to take new measures to protect Canadians. Since the very beginning of the pandemic, we've been clearly saying that no Canadians should be traveling. We will continue to work hard to protect Canadians, and we will be fixing the small issues with the implementation of the system, and we will always ensure that Canadians are safe. The Honourable Member for Montarville. Mr. Speaker, yesterday we read troubling accounts of official conversations between the American government and Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau. We learned that after the election of the Parti Québécois in 1976, Mr. Trudeau discussed a diplomatic and industrial strategy whose goal was to undermine the Canadian economy. He asked Paul Desmarais to move his business activities outside Quebec with the goal of doubling the unemployment rate in Quebec. So, the Canadian Prime Minister, for political ends, wanted to cause honest workers to lose their jobs. Does this Prime Minister believe that his predecessor's behavior was worthy of his role? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to open a historical debate with the Leader of the Bloc today, here and now. What now I'm concerned with is protecting Canadians from COVID-19. Is allowing the Canadian and Quebec economies to thrive once more, and that's what I'm going to be concentrating on. The Honourable Member for Montarville. Mr. Speaker, these revelations have reopened serious questions about federal support for Quebec flagship industries. Ottawa has abandoned our aerospace sector and is the only major country to not have a framework for the aerospace sector. It abandoned the Davie shipyard and our expertise in naval construction. Quebec is a pioneer in electric transit, but the federal government invested $300 million for batteries in Ontario, and the list goes on. This is clearly a trend today. And under Pierre Elliott Trudeau, it was clearly a deliberate strategy. More than ever, this Prime Minister should explain why he is neglecting our Quebec flagship companies. Will he explain that? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, since the very beginning of this pandemic, and since we came to power 5 years ago, we have been investing for Quebecers and Canadians. We have invested in new technologies. We have invested with our partners throughout the country and in Quebec for the aerospace sector, for electric transit. We will continue to invest. I understand that the Bloc Québécois is concerned when it sees that the federal government is working hard to help Quebecers and Canadians, and that it's very present in the everyday lives of Canadians, but that is exactly what we're doing.
Calgary Nose Hill.
The Liberals have put Canada months behind the rest of the world in getting vaccines, and troublingly, yesterday the government said that even with mass vaccination, COVID restrictions may continue. More public sacrifice and lockdowns were the response to the second wave, and the government's projections say that that clearly didn't work. So if the government is now saying vaccines won't lift all restrictions, what's the Prime Minister's plan B, or does he plan on keeping Canada under COVID restrictions forever?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not entirely sure what the opposition health critic has been watching, but we have seen over the past many weeks the numbers decline because of the significant public health measures that Canadians have been engaged in, the sacrifices people have been taking while the provinces have led the way on bringing in the right kinds of restrictions over the past number of months. We've seen it working, Mr. Speaker, and as vaccines are arriving at the same time as we're seeing a danger of variants, we need to keep remaining vigilant, get as many people vaccinated as possible, and continue to keep ourselves safe from the threat of a third wave.
Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Well, I watched Theresa Tam's press conference on Friday, and it had a violently high hockey stick projection of what the third wave could look like because the Prime Minister has not produced vaccines for Canadians. Virtually no one can get one. But again, the health officials said that even with mass vaccination, the government might not recommend opening up the country. People are losing their lives, their mental health, their jobs, and we need certainty and a plan to move forward. Is the government now saying that a fully vaccinated population won't end lockdowns? And if so, what will?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, every step of the way during this pandemic, we've made our decisions based on the best recommendations of science and scientists, comparing data from around the world, moving forward in ways that have kept Canadians safer than many countries, while at the same time we have seen too many tragedies. We will continue to move forward in ways that minimize the spread of COVID-19, that maximize the speed with which vaccines arrive, and work hand in hand with the provinces and territories with the public health measures that are necessary to see us through this this pandemic and out the other side in the best shape possible.
L'honorable député de Charbon.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the best way to get back to a certain state of normal in Canada would be to vaccinate. Great Britain has already unveiled a 4-point plan on how to get out of lockdown, and they're vaccinating 400,000 people a day. Canadians can see that we're falling behind, and it's his Prime Minister's fault. So what is his plan to make up for the delay? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we are beginning to receive hundreds of thousands of doses of vaccine per week, and in the weeks to come, we will be getting millions of doses. We know that we need to speed up vaccinations, but we must also remain vigilant regarding the variants coming in from elsewhere in the world. We will get through this. With the supports that we are offering as a government for small businesses and families, as well as the sacrifices that people are making that sadly we've had to make during the winter, we will continue to make sacrifices, but we will get through this together. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, I would remind the Prime Minister that Canada is still 53rd when it comes to doses of vaccine administered. All the other countries in the G7 are doing much better. We need a real plan. If the Prime Minister is so confident in his vaccine strategy, can he tell us when we will finally be able to leave lockdown?
We have a technical issue. Point of order. I'm not sure. I hear a voice.
Kurt, well, the interpretation, I'm hearing both at the same time, and the French version is coming in louder than the English interpretation.
I want to thank the Honourable Member for Hamilton Mountain. We'll take a look at that and make sure it gets corrected. I just have ask some a little bit of patience with that one. Is everything corrected? Okay, we'll do it. I'll speak in English. Everybody's hearing in French. Est-ce que tout le monde m'entend?
Can everyone hear me now in English in the interpretation? Is the problem resolved?
Thing, the honourable member for Hamilton Mountain, is everything clear? It's working out well?
Seems to be now, yes.
OK, c'est bon. Alors, ce que nous allons faire.
Very good. So we'll just start over. I would ask the member for Charlebourg Haute-Saint-Charles to ask his question again, just to ensure that we have continuity. The honourable member for Charlebourg Haute-Saint-Charles. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Now, these technical issues remind me of our technical issues getting out the vaccine, because we are still 53rd when it comes to our rates of administering the vaccines. Canadians are sick and tired of this. They're tired of these platitudes that we're hearing. Can the Prime Minister give us an actual plan? And can he tell Canadians when we'll be able to get back to normal life? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we all want to know when we'll be able to get back to normal. We all want to have this pandemic in the rearview mirror. But meanwhile, we will continue vaccinating more and more Canadians. We will continue to maintain public health measures. And at each step, we will reevaluate the situation depending on the situation with the variants and local conditions. We will work closely with provinces and territories as well as public health experts. And we will do everything in our power to keep Canadians safe, both for their well-being and for the economy to come roaring back after this pandemic.
Burnaby.
Well, Mr. Speaker, during this pandemic, universal pharmacare is needed more urgently than ever. 90% of Canadians support it. Millions of Canadians can't pay for the medication their doctors prescribe, and hundreds die every year. The Hoskins report stated it was essential that the principles of universal healthcare apply to universal pharmacare. The vote on the Canada Pharmacare Act is in an hour, and Canadians want to know, will the Prime Minister betray today his election promise for public universal pharmacare?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we agree that no Canadian should have to choose between putting food on the table or paying for their medications. That's why we remain committed to national universal pharmacare. Though we welcome debate on this motion, on this private member's bill, any actions must be taken with provinces and territories and not unilaterally imposed upon the provinces and territories. Now is the time to work with provinces and territories, as we are, to provide all Canadians access to affordable medication.
Honourable member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the facts are clear. The reality is that millions of Canadians today have to choose between paying their rent and getting the medication their doctors prescribe. Many are getting sicker and even dying from this lack of basic health care. Canada is the only country in the world with universal health care that doesn't cover prescription drugs. And the truth is, drug prices have risen every single year under this government's mandate. The truth as well is that the NDP bill works exactly the way our public health care system does, allowing provinces and territories to participate if they wish. Will the Prime Minister stop with his hollow excuses and vote for pharmacare as he has promised, and finally deliver universal pharmacare to every Canadian who needs it?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have been working since day one as a government to reduce prescription drug prices in this country, and we have done more to reduce prescription drug prices than any other government in history. And yes, we know that there is more to do, and that's why we have rolled up our sleeves and are working on national universal pharmacare in partnership with the provinces and territories. The NDP are pulling a political stunt to try and demonstrate that they could do it in the wave of a magic wand. Well, Mr. Speaker, we work in the real world here. We work with the provinces, we work within the Constitution, and we will deliver national pharmacare for Canadians.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday Prime Minister and President Biden met to ensure a coordinated approach to our shared priorities. And our two countries have agreed on a roadmap for renewed U.S. Canada partnership, which prioritizes the fight against COVID-19, economic recovery following pandemic strain, and the global climate threat. Can the Prime Minister please update the House on the joint Canada-US Build Back Better together? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for Kitchener Centre for his question and for his important work to strengthen Canada's most important relationship. Canada and the U.S. economies are deeply interconnected. Yesterday, President Biden and I discussed our shared vision for a sustainable and inclusive economic recovery, which ensures people have good jobs and supports middle-class prosperity on both sides of the border. We agreed to build back better together in a way that addresses the disproportionate impacts on women, youth, underrepresented groups, and Indigenous peoples, and we will continue to work together.
The honourable member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Beijing visa office is being run by a company owned by Chinese police, and the Liberal government doesn't seem concerned. The government and VFS Global say that people's information is protected from the entry point onwards. Mr. Speaker, people are entering information into those computers physically. How can the data processed by that center be considered secure when it's being input by people hired by a Beijing police-owned company?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I can assure you that, like our allies, including the UK, New Zealand, and others, we take extremely seriously the security and the privacy of people applying for visas. That's why we work very closely with the companies and the contractors involved to ensure that all privacy regulations and security protocols are being met. There is ongoing work to ensure that that remains always the case.
Honourable member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
But it was reported by the Globe and Mail that members of the Chinese Communist Party work in the visa office. Mr. Speaker, state-owned companies with a specific number of party members have to follow rules that allow the Communist Party to influence management. This is extremely concerning. Why is the Prime Minister willing to risk having our visa office influenced by the Chinese Communist Party?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, like I said, we take the privacy of applicants very seriously. All third-party contractors undergo rigorous screening. Officials regularly carry out thorough inspections and audits to ensure compliance to Canada's privacy standards. A number of countries also use the local company, including many of our Five Eyes allies. We will continue to do everything necessary to ensure the safety and integrity of our visa application system.
Honourable member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Mr. Speaker, after the Liberals said Line 5 was, quote, critical to Canada's energy and economic security, the Prime Minister didn't even raise the topic with President Biden yesterday. How are we supposed to rebuild a relationship with our most important ally when this PM can't even raise the most pressing issue, while 50,000 jobs on both sides of the border are at risk? How can Canadians believe the Prime Minister when he has no talk, no action?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to be able to correct the honourable member and point out that, yes, indeed, in our extensive bilateral conversations with the Americans yesterday, we brought up Line 5 because it continues to be an important issue for people in Ontario and Quebec and indeed across the country. We spoke yesterday about how Canada is a reliable source of energy, contributing to U.S. energy security and economic competitiveness. Ambassador Hillman and our Detroit Consul General are strongly advocating for Line 5 continued operation, and our government continues to engage at the highest levels.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Build back better together. That's a nice slogan, Mr. Speaker, but on day one, the Biden administration let thousands of Canadian families down with the cancellation of Keystone XL. Yesterday, 30,000 families were expecting the Prime Minister to bring up the situation personally with Line 5 because a decision has to be made in May. Michigan declared an energy emergency, and it doesn't seem to be urgent to this Prime Minister, despite the fact that workers, families, farms, communities across Ontario and Quebec are worried about Line 5. The Prime Minister's language was very specific. We raised it. Did the Prime Minister personally raise Line 5 with President Biden?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday Canada and the United States agreed to an ambitious roadmap partnership. We will work together to beat COVID-19 and ensure everyone everywhere has access to a vaccine. We will also fight climate change and accelerate clean growth. We will create jobs, we will grow the middle class and address systemic racism. We are each other's closest allies and most important trading partners. And yes, we talked about energy security, we talked about cross-border flows, and yes, we raised Line 5.
The
Honourable Member for Avignon-Lamitis, Matane-Matapédia. Mr. Speaker, the situation in hotels intended for mandatory quarantine of travellers is chaotic. After spending 28 hours on the phone to find a room, people end up stuck, crammed into the lobby with no physical distancing. There's no way to get an acceptable meal served. And what's worse, the physical safety of people is not assured. The Prime Minister simply took the quarantine problem and offloaded it onto the hotels without supervision. When is he going to finally show some leadership and take control the chaos he's created? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the safety of Canadians is our top priority. That's why we put in the strictest measures in the world for travellers returning to Canada. We will continue to ensure the safety of Canadians by enforcing those measures. We are aware of the delays with respect to the reservation system, and we thank Canadians for their patience as we put in place new measures for public health. With respect to the allegations of sexual harassment, we are very concerned about that, and we will ensure that there is appropriate follow-up by the authorities. The Honourable Member for Avignon Métis Matane-Matapédia. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister needs to take responsibility. He's failed on every step of the way. Unable to ban tourist flights at Christmas, unable to impose quarantines on hotels during the holiday season, not able to put in place a telephone line, not even able to ensure that people under his responsibility are safe in receiving services. He's offloaded all of the difficulties on hotels and travellers. He's responsible for this chaos. When he's going to fix it? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, at every step along the way, we have taken steps to ensure the safety of Canadians. We will continue to do so. We have among the strictest measures of all our allied countries, and we will continue to take a look at additional measures as needed to prevent the variants from spreading across the country. We'll continue to do what we can to accommodate the needs of travelers, but at the same time, our priority must remain the safety of Canadians who are vulnerable to those variants, and we will do what we need to protect people.
For Wellington, Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, Parliament has recognized the Uyghur Muslim genocide in Xinjiang. Upholding the rules-based international order means upholding treaties like the 1948 Genocide Convention. Article 1 of the convention clearly establishes Canada's obligation to prevent genocide even if it's extraterritorial. This obligation is binding and is the norm of international law. What action is the government taking to fulfill its obligation under the Genocide Convention and international law?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have always and we will always stand up for human rights around the world. We're deeply concerned by reports of human rights violations in China against the Uyghur minority, including significant and serious reports of genocides. We recognize that the vote in Parliament ensured that every member could make a determination based on available evidence. We welcome parliamentarians working together and debating this critical issue. As the government, we have a responsibility to work with others in the international community in ensuring that any such allegations are investigated by an independent international body of legal experts.
Member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, 20% of the world's cotton production comes from Xinjiang. It's been proven that a state-run coercive system is forcing 500,000 Uyghurs to pick the cotton. The measures announced last month on imports from Xinjiang are not sufficient. Does the government recognize that its measures will not work, and will it instead impose a ban on imports from Xinjiang? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. We always have and will continue to defend people across the world. We are deeply concerned by the reports of human rights violations against the Uyghurs and other minorities in China. Canada has adopted a comprehensive approach to defending the Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities, namely measures designed to reduce forced labor and to ensure that this does not end up in the Canadian procurement chain. Clearly, we will continue to work with all of our partners to bring forth additional measures as required. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
This House spoke with one voice this week. There is a genocide happening in Xinjiang. Canada has a responsibility to act. There's a bill in the Australian Senate that will ban imports from Xinjiang because of Uyghur forced labor. Legislation is being introduced in the U.S. Congress to do the same. Will the Prime Minister commit to a law to ban the import of products made from forced labor in Western China?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canada is adopting a comprehensive approach to defending the rights of Uyghurs with measures to address the risk of forced labor from any country, including China, from entering Canadian and global supply chains, and to protect Canadian businesses from becoming unknowingly complicit. We take this extremely seriously. We've brought measures in, and we will look to bring in more measures in partnership with the international community, because that is how we can have the greatest impact and protect the situation for the Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities.
Honorable Député.
The Honourable Member for Dorval-Lachine-LaSalle. Mr. Speaker, yesterday during their first virtual bilateral meeting, our Prime Minister and President Biden discussed efforts to be taken in the future. Our two countries agreed on a roadmap for a renewed U.S. Canada partnership that prioritizes the fight against COVID-19, economic recovery, and the global climate threat. Can the Prime Minister tell the House about the joint commitment by Canada and the U.S. when it comes to climate change? Thank you. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for Dorval-Lachine-LaSalle for her important question. President Biden and I have agreed to a high-level ministerial climate conference to coordinate Canada-U.S. cooperation. We also agreed to adopt an approach to accelerate our efforts toward a sustainable, resilient energy infrastructure. We're committed to working together with others to increase the scope and speed of our action against climate change.
Blake Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, the Defense Minister has repeated over and over that he informed all proper authorities about the serious allegations of sexual misconduct by the former Chief of Defense Staff. But the Minister refuses to tell Canadians who those authorities are, or even acknowledge he received the complaint back in 2018 as reported by media. Was the Prime Minister briefed by the Defense Minister on the allegations against General Vance when he first received them in 2018?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, every person deserves a safe work environment. I first learned of allegations against General Vance in Global News reporting. We have no tolerance for any form of sexual misconduct. When such allegations are brought to the Minister of National Defence's attention, he has always taken them seriously and reported to appropriate authorities. We have launched an independent investigation, and we have confidence that it will go underway appropriately.
Honourable Member for Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, allegations of sexual misconduct by our country's top general were shared with the Privy Council office, which advises and briefs the Prime Minister on just about everything. We know from news reports that the Privy Council office received information regarding the allegation of sexual misconduct against General Vance back in March of 2018. On what date did the PCO brief the Prime Minister about this allegation, and did he instruct his Defense Minister to launch an investigation, or did he tell him to just look the other way?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as a Prime Minister, as a leader of a political party, I have always taken immediate action and taken very seriously any allegations brought to my attention. As I just said, I first learned of allegations against General Vance in the Global News reporting. We have no tolerance for any form of sexual misconduct, and we will ensure that all appropriate steps have always been and will always be taken.
The Honourable Member for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill. Before she starts, I want to remind her to bring her microphone down. There we go, perfect.
Mr. Speaker, jarring testimony leveled abusive authority and sexual misconduct allegations against Canada's former top soldier and other senior officers. More officers were implicated as complicit through their silence. The Defence Minister had a duty to investigate and suspend General Vance, but the Minister did nothing. Men and women in uniform have lost confidence this Minister will bring senior officers to justice? How will the Prime Minister regain the trust of our military when they don't trust the Defense Minister who failed to protect them?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as a government, as a political party, we have always taken allegations extremely seriously, and we have always followed necessary procedures. When such allegations are brought to the Minister of National Defence's attention, he has always taken them seriously and reported as appropriate to appropriate authorities. The steps need to be taken and have been taken, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to ensure that everyone in this country, whether they work for the military or the public service or anywhere, works in a safe work environment.
The Honourable Member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country.
Mr. Speaker, last fall, the opposition leader claimed that Canada was at the back of the line for vaccines, that 2.5 billion people would get vaccinated before Canadians. This was on top of his health critics' claim that we wouldn't get vaccines until 2030. The leader of the Conservative Party has been deliberately misleading Canadians at a time of a national health emergency solely to advance his political aims. He was questioning a plan that is clearly working. Starting this past Sunday, over 500,000 doses of vaccines began arriving. Can the Prime Minister update us on how this sound procurement plan has ensured we're on our way to delivering 6 million doses to Canadians by the end of March?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country for his question and his extremely hard work. 643,000 doses of vaccines are arriving in Canada this week, with another 400,000 doses arriving next week. By the end of this week, 2.5 million doses will have been delivered, with another 3.5 million arriving in the month of March. That is our plan, and it has been our plan for months. We will make sure that all Canadians who wish to be vaccinated are vaccinated by September.
Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
Canada is the only high-income country that has a universal healthcare system that does not include universal coverage of prescription drugs. We also pay the third highest prices in the world for prescription medication. All MPs have a chance to change that by supporting the NDP's universal public Pharmacare bill. We need to put partisanship aside and work together for Canadians across the country. Will the Prime Minister put people before politics and end their 24 years of empty rhetoric on universal public Pharmacare and follow expert advice so that millions of Canadians can finally get the medication they need?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, if the member opposite wanted to put aside politics, she would recognize that no government in a generation has done as much as this government to reduce prescription drug prices. We will continue to work with provinces and territories. We will continue to move towards national universal pharmacare. We will not impose some solution on paper that won't work practically for Canadians or on the provinces. We will work with them to actually deliver. It's one thing for political rhetoric to ring out in this House. It's another thing for the actions that this government has taken and will continue to take to actually impact on the lives of Canadians for the better.